So I was born as a church girl. I was dedicated into the Baptist church when I was 6 months old. There was a picture of it in the paper. And I don't remember a time that I really wasn't in church. I accepted Christ when I think I was in the 6th or 7th grade, and I don't know what prompted me to do it, but I was walking home from school one day, and we lived in apartments on the west side of Columbus, and I walked up to these utility meters that are on the side of the building. I remember they were big and green, and I just remember using it as kind of like an altar, and I remember I said, "Whatever you want from me, that's what I want to be." I just knew at that moment that I had done something momentous, and I felt good. And that's really when I accepted Christ. I went home, I told my mom what I did. She was like, "Do you know what you just did?" And I said no, and she said, "You accepted Christ, and that's a wonderful thing." So I grew up with parents who were God-fearing parents. They were divorced, and so part of the time I lived with my mom, and then on weekends I saw my dad. During this time, I also was being abused by someone who was very close to me, and I don't really want to say who, because they have changed. They have repented and apologized for what they did, but it was very early on in my childhood, and every way that you can be abused, I was abused, and that sort of thing stays with you. It affects you for the rest of your life. So outwardly, I was a very happy kid. I was doing well in school. I was a people pleaser. I was a good girl. Inwardly, I was struggling. And I learned later on in my adulthood that probably through most of my life, I have suffered from depression. So I was a pretty smart kid, and I knew early on that I wanted to be a doctor. I think for as long as I can remember, that's the only thing I ever wanted to be. I had a grandmother who was a nurse. My dad was a pharmacist. I was surrounded by medical people, and I just knew I wanted to be a doctor. I went to Capital University, went to Ohio University for medical school, went back home to Columbus to do my residency, and then I found a job here in Marysville and practiced medicine for about 3 years. And then a very difficult time in my life started, where I ran into some legal problems, which are really too in-depth to get into here. But I'm willing to talk about them if you'd like to know about them. This legal trouble that I got into took away my ability to be a doctor, and made it so that I really would not ever be able to practice again. And that was almost like somebody took my identity and just ripped it away from me. I didn't know who I was anymore. I shut down. I didn't know how else to deal with it. What followed after that was a period in my life the only thing that I can call it was that I walked through hell. They say that hell is isolation from God, and that is what I would call depression. When people think about depression that have never been depressed, they tend to have this thought that if you could just buck up or be happy or, go out and do something fun, that depression would go away. But that's not how it works. Depression takes you away from who you are. Everything turns gray. nothing interests you anymore. You just shut down. And I went through an 8-year period where I was completely lost from myself. I was suicidal. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to hear, but when you wake up every day and it's so gray and so dark that you don't know any other way out. I was hospitalized inpatient 3 times, and I went through outpatient hospitalization. And it almost became like my identity that I was this depressed woman. And I didn't see any way out of it. During the time, I was angry. I was really angry. And I felt betrayed by God. I felt very alone because while I never gave up on God, and while I always believed that God was there, I thought that God had just left me, that God had moved on to bigger and better things. So for 8 years, I went through that. So then one day I woke up, and it was just a day like any other day, and I felt better. And I can't tell you why I felt better. I don't know what made me feel better other than God, because there was nothing different in my life. Nothing really had changed as far as stressors or the things that were happening in my life. I was just better. And as the days went by, I felt better and better and better and better. I started going back to church because I had pulled away from church because I was isolating myself. It took a long time before I started to feel God again, but I decided that if I just stuck around, at some point it was bound to happen, and it did. God was faithful in all of it. I know now that God never left me, and I think part of what I went through was learning that I couldn't get through life on my own, because during that time I had to be very reliant on other people. I was not able to do the majority of things that I needed to do to get by in life, and so my independence was completely taken away from me. I learned that I had to depend on others, and that others wanted to help me. I learned that God was there for me, that the things that happened to me were not something that God did to me, but something brought on by man. It's not something that I'm completely resigned to yet, because it was a very difficult thing to go through. It's what happened. And so, it's just something that I have to, I guess, live with and think through. I started working at the church. Having this job and being in this environment, it healed me more than I can ever say. While I've been here, I started studying with Vineyard Institute, and so now I am in the process of taking classes to become a pastor, which is pretty exciting and pretty amazing to me that I get to spend all my time studying God and Christianity and love and how to love your neighbor. And it's just amazing to me that that's what I get to do with my life. I don't think if I hadn't have gone through the things that I went through, I would be the person that I was today. I wouldn't have the compassion that I have, and I wouldn't be able to empathize with people the way that I do. My church was there for me, because this church, the people of this church got me through. They reached out to me. They took me shopping. They came over and cleaned my house. They watched my kids. They prayed for me. People prayed and prayed and prayed. And when I think about that now, it just kind of chokes me up because I didn't appreciate it then. But I want you to know, I want everybody to know that I do now.